Welcome to the Elevate Your Call to Service podcast. Here we provide tips, tools, and resources to help law enforcement officers succeed at work and in life. I'm your host, Michael McIntosh, retired sheriff and current bureau chief in the Denver metro area. Despite their dedication to safeguarding their communities, the focus of personal well-being of law enforcement officers can easily fade into the background. Today, I'm here with Nick Metz, who is working to underscore the need for personal wellness as a cornerstone of effective law enforcement. Nick is a 36-year law enforcement veteran who served as the Deputy Chief of Police in Seattle and the Chief of Police of the Aurora Police Department here in Colorado. He's the co-founder of It's a Calling Foundation, which is dedicated to raising funds to enhance the mental health and wellness support that first responders and military personnel need. If you'd like to learn more about It's a Calling or donate to the cause, visit itsacalling.org. So Nick, I just wanted to take some time this morning and really kind of talk about a couple of different organizations that you're associated with, and it's really around the wellness and the mental health for our law enforcement officers, and not just law enforcement, but first responders in general. How did you get into that? And I know that once you did, you really have a passion for that now.
I do. It's actually kind of I have to go back a few years. Prior to coming out to Colorado, I was with the Seattle Police Department and had been involved in a lot of different critical incidents, either personally or responding to those. I was part of an organization back there called Behind the Badge, which is the equivalent of Colorado Fallen. And so I was part of a team that went out, and when there was a line of duty death, we handled the arrangements and supported the family and the agency. 2009 was a life changer for me. From October 31st of 2009 to the end of the year, in just that 8-week period, we lost 7 officers in 8 weeks throughout the Seattle metro area in the line of duty. October 31st, Officer Tim Breton was ambushed while sitting in his patrol car. He worked for Seattle PD. Big manhunt. During the funeral, the suspect actually during the funeral, our homicide detectives had gotten a tip that of where the suspect may be, and our homicide detectives went out there to take a look, and he got a jump on them and actually put a gun to the face of one of the detectives, pulled the trigger, and the gun didn't go off. And we like to think that was divine intervention. Don't know if there was any issues with the gun or the round. Big gunfight occurred then, and fortunately our officers came out the victors on that one. And it was right during the funeral for Tim Breton. And I remember getting the call and talking to my sergeant who was there. He's really upset, trying to get him calmed down. Got the story, and it was just kind of one of those things where everybody was able to kind of take a deep breath, and I had the ability to go back into the funeral, and we were able to tell this crowd of 4,000 people that we got the guy. So everybody took this sigh of relief, and everyone tried to put their lives back to normal. And then you may remember this, not a week and a half later, 4 Lakewood, Washington police officers were sitting in a coffee shop and were gunned down, just sitting in the coffee shop. And again, as my role in Behind the Badge, I responded to that immediately. And again, we had another manhunt on our hands. And so trying to work with the families, working with an agency that maybe had 75 people. So you can imagine everybody knew everybody. And then a few days later, that same suspect tried to ambush one of my guys in Seattle. Fortunately for us, unfortunately for him, he picked the wrong guy, because the guy he tried to ambush had been with us for about 1.5 years, but was also a 10-year veteran as a Navy SEAL. So didn't work out well for the guy. And so again, there was that first sigh of relief, right? And then not a week and a half after that, a Pierce County deputy was responding to a domestic. The guy came out the door and shot and killed him, which was only about 1.5 miles, 2 miles from where the Lakewood Four were killed. And then a few weeks after that, a couple weeks after that, we had a Snohomish County deputy that was T-boned at an intersection and killed. You can imagine what the emotions must have felt like in that metro area. And we really saw the impacts that was having on families and officers. We were seeing officers who were really questioning whether or not they wanted to be in the job, families wanting their officer to get out of the profession. We saw incidents of substance issues going up. We saw suicidal issues going up, all sorts of different things. But one thing we didn't see, at least in Seattle, nobody quit.
No kidding.
Nobody quit.
Wow.
And we had an academy class of 40 that was starting that January, just a few weeks after all this. All 40 seats were filled. Wow. And you look at what's happening today, right? And so, but people really struggle. And so that for me was where I started to see, was where my passion for wellness really started to develop. And we were one of the first departments in the country to create a full-time wellness unit. We had no idea what we were doing. But at least we were getting people help. We were getting them in the treatment and all those kind of things. And we were seeing families that were really struggling. And so that's where my passion came from. And then when I came out to Colorado, to Aurora, I replicated a lot of those initiatives. And it's just been something I've, been very passionate about.
Now you helped stand up Colorado Fallen.
Correct.
When you got here. I remember as a sheriff when you came to the sheriff's conference and presented that thought and that idea, not knowing at the time that I was going to need to utilize that resource, but was extremely supportive of it because of the dynamics that are around that and everything that goes on during an officer-involved shooting. And from that, you then got connected with Code 4, and then it's a calling. Really, and I think that's kind of a natural transition, just because when we go through that fallen hero, and when that fallen hero is laid to rest, the work's not done at that point, and it's critically important that we continue to monitor our officers, but more importantly that we provide different programs through wellness to make sure that we are taking care of them as they're still walking through through that process, whether it's a line of duty death, whether it's a serious injury,
officer-involved shooting. Yeah.
There's so many things right now that our first responders are going through that finally, I think, having been in law enforcement for, over 3 decades, finally, I think that we as administrators, we that have been in the law enforcement profession long enough are realizing that we've got to take care of our most valuable asset, and that's the men and women that we employ for our different agencies. Tell me a little bit about Code 4, and then how you got into it's a calling and
yeah. First, I want to just say that the comment that you just made about taking care of people in the aftermath is so important. I always tell folks and teach that the first week of a crisis is the easiest. Right? I mean, it sounds weird to say that, but everybody comes together. Everybody's got a common mission. Everybody's, what can we do for the family? What can we do for the officers? And then after everything starts to settle, like whether it's the memorial or other things, everyone scatters. No, and they're not bad people. It's not that at all. It's just people got to get back to their lives. And then that's when the families and that's when officers who were directly impacted are now sitting there in silence going, what now? And so to a point that you're making, wanting to make sure that we're giving them that kind of support ongoing, weeks, months, even years after. So we stood up Code 4 counseling for the purpose of, providing mental health services for responders and their families. And we really wanted to emphasize supporting families as well, because I think, as I said one time before, if things ain't good at home, they're not good at work. And if they're not good at work, they're likely not good at home. So we want to make sure that we're helping responders and their families find that healthy balance. And so whether it's through relationship issues, healing from a critical incident, whatever the case may be, interestingly, the majority of the clients that we see, the issues aren't directly related to the job.
Yeah.
I think a lot of us thought going in that we were going to hear all this stuff about critical incidents and how they're struggling. No, it's day-to-day life. It's marriage struggles. It's, substance issues. It's all sorts of different things. But the job exacerbates the problem, so it magnifies it even more. And so again, what we were finding, though, is that there were people who needed services that weren't able to take advantage of those services because they either worked for an agency that didn't contract with us, didn't have the financial ability to pay, that maybe they were retired, public safety, and they're carrying those scars of the past, and they've not worked through those things. And so we were seeing a lot of people fall through the cracks and not getting the services they need. And so we wanted to take that excuse out of the equation. So we created the It's a Calling Foundation. It's a 501c3 board managed nonprofit. We have a phenomenal board that consists of folks who are law enforcement, fire, business, legal, just all sorts of folks, people who are actually in the recovery, alcohol or substance recovery community. Folks who really provide some just amazing guidance to us and share our vision to making sure that our responders and their families are taken care of. And so it was created again for that purpose of reaching out and being able to bring those folks in and getting them the services that they need. And the trade-off a little bit was that a lot of the interns that we have right now in Code 4 are actually active or former public safety responders. So they've lived it, they've been there, and they've done that. And so part of the trade-off a little bit was they need to get their hours in to graduate and for their licensure. And so it was a great fit for them to have these folks come in to say, hey, I need help, I'm struggling with this, I can't afford the $120 an hour psychologist, but they can talk to someone who's actually in school right now to become a mental health counselor. And so it was a really good trade-off. To date, we have seen we've been in existence since December of 21, so it's a little over a year and a half, and we've had 500 sessions with folks that otherwise would not have gotten it. And the other part that I think I was telling you before was we were also hearing from a lot of folks that they were reaching out to their EAPs, their employee assistance programs, and they were going to people who had no background in public safety and didn't understand the unique stressors. So they were going in, and one officer told me that they went in telling a story to this EAP, and the EAP broke down and started crying because they couldn't take the story, and there he is comforting him. And then another officer who had been involved in an officer-involved shooting went to the EAP, was talking about what happened, and the EAP said, well, I don't understand why you couldn't have shot them in the leg. So now that judgment was raised, nobody likes to be judged, nobody wants to be shamed, and that was like, yeah, we're done. So we want to make sure they're able to come into a place that's culturally competent, that get it, people who've been there and done that. And so, again, since then we are continuing to advance the cause of It's a Calling. We do therapy in person and virtual. So we're seeing clients from all over the state.
I know that COVID kind of put that need for virtual mental health and virtual client contact. Is that being as effective as the in-person, in your opinion? Are you still able to work through the things that need to be?
Yeah. So in-person is always going to be better. That's, I'm an intern now as well, getting my, going for licensure to become a licensed professional counselor. And I will tell you, I love in-person more because there's more of a connection. You can watch body language, all those kinds of things. But for people who may be living, west of the mountains or in the middle of a, rural community, they don't have an alternative. And so the virtual is better than nothing. It has been very effective. We've worked with cops and firefighters who have been through critical incidents in these rural communities and are able to work with them on a virtual level, and things have worked out really well.
Are you seeing, and you're primarily just in Colorado, right?
We only practice Colorado. We'll teach and consult outside, but as far as actual therapy, it's all inside Colorado.
We talk about the fact that there's a huge stigma around mental health, especially amongst first responders. Mm-hmm. Are you seeing that we're getting on top of that there isn't the stigma out there like there used to be, or are we still kind of in the dark ages there?
I would say in Colorado, I think Colorado probably is the number one state in the country when it comes to the level of service that is provided to responders and their families when it comes to mental health. We've got a lot of things, whether it's Code 4, Broward, Nicoletti, and some of the others. A lot of states don't have that. So it's interesting for us when we do assessments for agencies or wellness assessments in other states, and we start asking them questions about, well, do you have this? Do you have that? That have become such a norm in Colorado. And they're like, well, we don't know what you're talking about. A lot of it does come down to as well, though, is we have what's called, and I know you're familiar with this, the DOLA grant through the state that I think this year provided $7 million towards mental health services for responders. And maybe one or two other states has something similar, but that's huge. And so I think for responders in Colorado, the only excuse that they can have really to say they couldn't get mental health treatment is because they chose not to get it. There's so much available out there.
What are you seeing from and you said that a lot of what you're seeing, which, as you said, it's also surprising to me that it's not work related. What from an administrative standpoint, what are you seeing that is work related that we that are in supervisory positions really need to start paying attention to? Or
I love that question. So again, the natural thought would be for most that it's going to be the critical incident. It's not. It's organizational stress. It's folks feeling as if they're working in environments where the department leadership, their agency leadership, they don't feel that their agency supports them. They don't feel that the agency has their back. They feel that their agency is overly punitive rather than trying to work through things, the whole host of things. But that, from the agency perspective, that is the number one issue that comes to play, is that whole issue of, either not feeling supported, not understanding the direction that an agency is trying to go, not feeling connected to leadership, where leadership doesn't, the only time they ever see leadership is when they're in trouble for something versus, the upper leadership taking the time to hit the roll calls, go on rides, having talk sessions with the troops about, tell me about what the issues are that are bothering you. What do you think needs to be changed? All those kind of things. Most people understand that, they can have a complaint and there may not be anything that the leadership can do. And when I say leadership, I'm talking about sergeants all the way to the top. There may not be anything they can do, but they just want to be heard and also have their concerns and issues acknowledged versus just, feeling like they're just a butt in the seat or a body in the jail or something like that.
So obviously a lot of work could be and should be done in organizational culture and leadership. What do you provide in counseling, or what encouragement do you give the individual to help them work through that? If it's right, they're going up against a sergeant or a lieutenant, or even an entire administration. How do you encourage them to navigate that so that they can be healthy and productive members?
So we started I think you may know of this, we started a program called LAWS, Leadership, Accountability, Wellness, and Service, and we've been teaching it all over the state, all over the country. And initially we started it with the idea that it was just going to be upper management, and then we took it down to first level. And then we had a few agencies that came to us, and we just hadn't thought about it. It was a great idea. They said, we want all of our people to hear it. Leadership is not just about rank, it's about the individual. And so our mantra about that is, you need to learn to control what you can control, right? You're not going to be able to control what the chief or sheriff or the lieutenant or sergeants do necessarily, but you can control your own outlook of the job. You can control how much you decide you want to put forward and effort. We talk about the importance of leadership is taking care of people to your left, right, above you, and below you. And if that's all you, if you're just this one individual, that's your job. So rather than spending a lot of time and energy, complaining about all the things that are happening, ask yourself, then what am I doing to make my work environment for me better? And what am I doing to make sure that I'm a better coworker to my partners around me? Am I providing cover and backup to my troops the way I should be? Am I out there providing service to the community like I should be? Am I, when new rookies come on board, am I telling them, oh man, you're going to hate this place, or hey, welcome, and let me be there to be the one to help you? And it's really been pretty cool to see how well that has resonated to the line level. So we've provided that training to fire departments, police departments, even hospitals. And I think it's helping. And then just also helping to teach people how to self-soothe and cope, right? And when they feel their emotions are getting too hot, whether it's because of something that happened at home or something at work, in that moment, that's not the time that they can call me up and say, help me, right? It's like, hey, you got to figure out for yourself how to bring yourself down and how to bring yourself back into focus. So we teach techniques on things like
that. That laws or those comments that you made around that, I look a lot of that, and there's always been this concept around morale.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll hear a shift say that it has low morale, and I've heard leaders in the past say that morale is on the individual. It's not on an agency. It's not my role. Your morale is not my role as a leader. And there is some truth in that. And I think that where the truth lies in that is you have the ability to control how it is that you're going to react to things that are presented to you. But I also think that there's, from an organizational standpoint, that there's a lot that we can do
absolutely
to ensure that we've got a positive culture, which is really going to help with morale in an organization.
Yep. No, you're absolutely right. And if I didn't say that, I should have. It's the philosophy and outlook of an agency starts with the top. It just does. And I think sometimes formal leaders, so those in command staff positions, oftentimes don't realize how much they're being watched by their troops and how much troops are noticing contradictions in their behaviors. It's my expectation that you're here on time and you do 8 hours of work and you do this and you do that. And yet the commander is sitting in their office watching videos and not doing what they need to be doing, or is not on time, or is expecting the troops to be truthful and honest, but then isn't being truthful and honest with them. So I think leaders need to understand they're being watched at all times. And anything a leader does that looks a little bit outside the norm is going to be much more magnified than what the ranking file would do, right? And so it's really important, I think, for leaders to understand that. And then we go back to controlling what you can control. Well, for the top, the control is your entire agency. That's your job. But how do you do that in a way that makes people feel like, they may not always agree with you. They'll get mad at you now and then, but do they know where your heart is? Do they know that your heart really is to make sure that your priority for your folks as they go home at the end of shift to their families, that they have the services that they need, that you're willing to listen to their concerns and everything else, even if there's nothing you can do to help it. But
in this program, I'm familiar with the program. I haven't gone pro yet. Would really like to do that. Do you give or provide the leaders of organizations some tools and some tips to make sure that they are working towards creating that positive culture? You made that comment that, you're always being watched as a leader. Mm-hmm. And I didn't realize to what extent until I was the sheriff mm-hmm. of an organization. And I heard my administrative assistant tell me one day that, people would inquire as to what kind of mood is the boss in today. And people that know me, I'm usually fairly, easygoing and don't know whether, anybody's ever really seen me fly off the handle. And that really kind of struck me as odd because I think that I carry myself in a certain way, but others would perceive that a little bit differently mm-hmm. or would actually see the difference or the nuance from one day to the next, depending upon maybe, there were times that I would definitely say that I get focused mm-hmm. and I would probably give a not as approachable persona than most of the time. Mm-hmm. But other people would interpret that, maybe differently.
Right.
The boss is pissing off for some reason. Right. So is this a good time to ask for, whatever special project it is? But it's so true that in those leadership positions, we really, really have to be aware of the impact that just our actions have.
When you started talking about the mood thing, it brought me back to when I was chief in Aurora, and I don't even remember it happening, but I remember a little later I had run into this officer and we were talking, and he says, "Oh, I didn't think you liked me." And I was like, "Why?" He goes, "Well, one day I was walking on the second floor and you were walking the other way, and I said, 'Hi, Chief,' and you didn't say anything to me." And I don't remember. I must have been lost in my head because I always did my best to make sure, even if I was in a bad mood, to acknowledge the people. And so I was like, wow, that he took that and magnified for him because, oh my God, this is the top of the department, not, he doesn't like me. What's going to happen to my career now? And I was just like, I don't even remember it happening. But, I always use this quote: people may not remember what you said or what you did, but they're always going to remember how you made them feel. And so whatever I did in that moment, he remembered it, right? And so I think it's so important. When I teach the class, I tell this story about I had two assistant chiefs when I worked in Aurora that worked for me, and they both would go around and tell everybody they had an open door policy. And they said, "I have an open door policy, and you can come up and see me anytime." And one of them came to me one time and he said, "I don't understand." He goes, "I tell everybody I have an open door policy, and yet nobody comes up to see me. The other guy, he tells them the same thing, and he's got 9 or 10 people a day standing outside his door wanting to talk to him about something." And I said, "Okay, well, what does an open door policy mean to you?" "Well, it means I have my door open, they can just come on in." I said, "Well, an open door policy means you also have to go out. That means you have to leave your office. You have to go on rides. You have to go to hit the roll calls. You have to go to training and train with these people. You have to do those things so that when they see you doing what they're doing, then they realize with you that you don't think of yourself as any better than them." And so he started to work on that, and it started to get a little better. But it's one of those things I think sometimes we don't, as leaders, we forget that. And so part of the laws too is the motto basically is, how we treat people on the inside is going to impact how they treat people on the outside. And we always talk about the leadership and wellness cannot be mutually exclusive. I know I've been to departments that have all the bells and whistles of wellness. I mean, you guys have some great stuff, but I'm talking about departments that even just shadow most agencies when it comes to all the tools, but their morale in those agencies are crap because they don't trust the leadership. I've been to agencies where they have very little in the way of wellness resources. People are happy as they can be because they know that their chief or sheriff cares, and the upper leadership. So if you can kind of get those two, you're never going to get them 50-50, but if you can get them fairly close, that's when you'll start to see that level of the morale. It's always going to be like this anyway, right? But I think even when morale is bad, your goal, I think, should be that at least the people know that they can trust you.
So I know that you guys have put together a conference that's coming to the kind of the South Metro area, I guess, is what I would call it. Tell us a little bit about that and whether or not people can still sign up to attend and what they can expect.
Yeah, no, thank you. So last year, like in January of 22, I met this guy, Jordan Long, who I think we talked about before, and get him on your show. He had started an organization called Revital Colorado and was doing some really unique things in getting public safety folks and their families off the grid and doing things fun like fly fishing and, bowling, golfing, all that kind of stuff, and bringing people together. And it's not intended to be a therapeutic type of environment, just more to get people to just be and get away from everything. And, talking to him, we were just so much on the same page of what we wanted to see for responders and their families. And then, like a month or two later, we're like, we should do a wellness conference. Neither one of us have ever done a wellness conference. And we're like, yeah, that'll be fun. That'll be really easy. Yeah. And so we were like, yeah, let's do this. And so we brought a team of folks together, some great, planners and all that kind of stuff. And we put on our very first wellness conference in September of 2022. And it was a huge success. We brought in, I don't know if you know who is, you may not know him by name, Chris Fields. Chris is the firefighter that's holding the little girl in the iconic photo from the Oklahoma City bombing. And we brought him as a guest speaker and a whole bunch of other folks from around the country. We had people from all over the country coming. And we intentionally kept it about 350 people because we wanted it to be intimate and just everybody be in the same room. And so we got through that. It was a massive success. And Jordan and I looked at each other and said, yep, one and done. This is it. We did our one conference. And then we just got a lot of feedback from folks that were saying, we want this again. And so we're doing it again. And, I've said it before to you guys, but thank you to Douglas County Sheriff for helping sponsor that event because we need that kind of support. And so we're doing it again, September 13th and 14th of 2023. We've got some great speakers coming in that are going to be talking about issues of resilience, supporting their families, cardiac health, substance issues, all sorts of different things. And it will be held at the Doubletree Hotel in Greenwood Village.
Okay. And then how do people find that information?
So all they got to do is go to www.levelupconference.org. www.levelupconference.org. Whatever you do, don't put a hyphen in between Level Up and Conference because some weird cultish site comes up.
So you'll know.
You'll know.
You do it wrong.
Yeah, if you'll see the pictures, you'll go, might not be the right one.
Not the right one.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had also talked about from a wellness perspective, it's just kind of a time to get together at this conference and really talk about what's going on currently in the world of wellness,
mm-hmm.
and for first responders, but also kind of where we're headed and how it is that we kind of get there.
A lot of it, and again, I go back to Jordan and my wife, Sarah, and others, that we really want to take a unique approach. Therapy is not the number one answer, or the only answer, I should say, when it comes to providing wellness services. It's not just having, neurofeedback. It's not just having PT. It's having a whole conglomerate of different types of things that come together. And being able to work together on those things and not being stuck in silos. And so, for example, when I go back to Revital with Jordan, your agency had a pretty nasty critical incident several months ago, and some of the officers and detectives were, they were stressed from the investigation and everything. And so what Jordan did was he rented out a big indoor go-kart track, and we brought all the detectives and all the officers that were involved in the incident to the go-kart track on their day of working. And it was hilarious. They came in and they're all like, seriously, we're going to hang out at a go-kart track? We had the whole place to ourselves, and, the guys put the helmets on, got in the go-kart tracks, and they went from 30 years of age back to 15. They were having the best time racing one another and just letting off steam in a very fun way, and laughter. It was so cool hearing laughter. And then what we did afterward was they have a little training room inside this facility, and we went in there, and then we talked about self-care and taking care of your family and all those kinds of things. And so being able to team up on things like that, is really important, and not just relying on one particular modality, because some people aren't, therapy is not for them, and so we have to understand that, okay, well, then we have to find another way to get to them.
I want to give folks a couple of takeaways from this conversation, and based upon what it is that you're seeing in the world of wellness and kind of the holistic approach, what are kind of 2 or 3 of the top things that you would tell our listeners that they can start working on? They may not be in an organization, or they could be retired. They could be in a place where they don't have the access through their organization that they might need. What are a couple of things that they can do to really work on that holistic approach and that self-care?
So when you think of the average responder, firefighter, police officer, and we're throwing frontline medical folks in there now, the ER nurses and docs. I mean, we saw firsthand what like COVID did to them. But the other reason we put them as responders is when you start talking to them, they have that same sixth sense of humor as we do. They look at the world in a very similar way as the street responders. But the one thing about all of our responders is they're willing to put themselves out there and take a risk, right? They're willing to say, man with a gun call, you can't keep the cops away from that. Big fire, you're not going to keep the firefighters from going inside a building and rescuing. They're willing to take those life-threatening risks. What we're asking them to do when it comes to things like wellness is take the emotional risk, which for some can be even harder to do. And so, we'll oftentimes get people coming in for therapy where it's the very first time they've ever been in counseling. They're talking about their most interpersonal feelings, whether it's an individual or couple. And I always tell them, at least my clients, I said, I'm going to ask you to put yourself out there a little bit and trust yourself, trust me, trust the process, and take the risk of being as open as you can. Everything said in here stays in here. There's no judgment or shame coming from me, no matter what it is you bring up. I'm here for you. That's my my role. And, some people really struggle with that. So I would say that's the number one thing. Be willing to take that emotional risk. I would also say, take care of your family, whatever that family looks like, whether it's an intact family, whether it's, whether kids are splitting time between mom and dad, but do your best to take care of that family, because again, if things aren't good at home, you're going to carry that stuff into work, and it will impact how you make your decisions. It will impact how you interact with the community, with your coworkers, all those kinds of things. When you see officers getting into serious misconduct trouble, 9 times out of 10, at least in my experience, they've got a lot of stuff going on that drove them to make a bad decision. And so, again, I go back to risk taking. Take the risk and come into counseling with your kids, with your spouse, with your ex. I've got a couple that they've been divorced 3 or 4 years, but they come in to make sure that they're in a good place to make sure their kids are getting what they need. And so it does come down to risk. The other part is be willing to confront someone who you care about, who you can see is going down the slippery slope. Sadly, one of our agencies had a suicide 2 weeks ago. A really beloved sergeant took her life. And we spent a lot of time over the last 2 weeks at this agency. And what was really sad was hearing from so many people that saw something going on, but didn't know how to address it. Didn't have I won't say courage. That's not the best word, but just didn't know and were shy about saying, "Are you okay? Can we go talk somewhere? Do you want to go grab dinner?" or something like that. And as I talked about before, like the man with the gun call, we're gonna go all out for that, and we're gonna be there for our fellow officer, even if that's someone we don't necessarily like. I'm gonna be there for them. We need to do the same thing with our peers. We need to provide that kind of cover for our peers and confront them and say, "You're going down a slippery slope. I'll go with you to counseling. I'll drive you. You need to go." And you might lose a friend for a bit. You might have someone who's angry, but sometimes they'll come around and they'll be like, "Yeah, you're absolutely right."
The kind of the last thing that I wanted to talk about, if someone is in that spot, that critical spot where they're really contemplating self-harm or suicide, what is it that they need to do immediately to make sure that we don't experience that?
Yeah, that's a tough one. And so, like, sometimes with clients that we have who are really struggling, who may have in the past experienced suicidal ideation, we will put them on what we call a safety plan. We write it up for them, and it gives them reminders of where they can turn to for help. But the other thing it gives them reminders about is why they should stay alive. Because sometimes with people that I've talked to who have been really on that brink of making that decision, it wasn't that they just decided that morning to wake up and go, I think I'll do this today. It was because they felt hopeless. And when I hear that word hopeless, that scares the crap out of me, because they feel like they're in a place at that time they can't crawl out of whatever hole they're in. They don't see a way out, And a lot of times what we find in discussions with folks is the one thing that tends to be a common denominator for people who are finding themselves in those dark holes is exhaustion. They're the lack of sleep. We underestimate the importance of sleep. And so exhaustion ends up, creating, puts us in dark places because we're tired. We don't see anything. We can't see the positives. We're more prone to mistakes. We're more prone to poor decision making. So sleep really becomes a huge part of what people need to do. But we underestimate it because we see a lot of responders out there that are either they're working odd hours and then they got a lot of responsibilities at home. They're working 2 jobs and they're lucky if they're getting 3 or 4 hours of sleep a night. And that stuff adds up over time and it impacts us. So that would be one of the first things I would tell people is to really check their sleep. And then the other would be, obviously reach out to Code 4, It's a Calling, Brower, Nicoletti. We don't care. It's about them. And so reach out to somebody that you think that you would trust. What I would also tell people who may know someone who they know is struggling, but they don't know what to do, call us. call your peer support members, and we'll cold call that person. We'll show up and go, hey, we're hearing people are worried about you. And they might be upset about it that someone outed them, but if it keeps them alive for another day to talk about it, then we've done our part.
That's an incredible option that you guys offer because sometimes it's tough and you may not even know what to say or how to confront somebody. You just know based upon, either being close to that person or noticing, some of the self-harm types of ideations that are going on. You may not know how to deal with it, but having some place where, you can go to say, is there any chance that you as a professional can check in with this person?
And I think to that point, kind of going back to the whole leadership piece, one thing that we always talk to leadership and peer supporters about, peer supporters or leaders, is we really encourage folks to be vulnerable, meaning tell your story. Go around the department and talk about you experienced substance issues, you've experienced marriage setback, you've experienced financial things. Because when other folks who may be shy about seeking help can see that their leaders and their peers are willing to put their stuff out there, it makes it less risky for them to now also do that. So like, for example, when we do peer support training during our 40-hour peer support, we make every classmate, we spend almost like 2 or 3 hours a day in going through the class. Every person has to get up and tell their story. We don't do the role play thing. You got to get up and talk about your struggle, what happened in your life that impacted you. And you'd be amazed the stories that they tell. First, and for many of them, it's the first time they've ever publicly told the story. And then we tell them, now go back and tell your peers that, because that's what's going to give you the credibility that you're someone that actually cares.
And that you've experienced.
You've been there.
And that it's okay.
It's okay.
I mean, you're still with that agency. You're in a role as a peer support member or as a sergeant or one of the folks within the agency, and it gives that that hope and that thought that, well, if they got through it, then I can get
exactly,
and that the agency, in a way, demonstrates that the agency will also support you through and get you to the other side of where it is that you're struggling.
I would say that one of the main reasons your agency is so approachable about mental health issues and will reach out actually comes from your SWAT team of all people. Because when they went through following Dan's shooting and then Zach's thing, it really impacted the SWAT team a lot, and they actually started to come out and be vulnerable with each other, and they started telling others around the department. And now when you're seeing these big macho SWAT dogs saying, yeah, I go to therapy, what's wrong with it? Right. You tell me what's wrong with it, I dare you. Right? And the other guys and gals are looking at that going, oh, if the SWAT guys can go around and tell people they go to therapy, I guess we can too.
Yeah. Well, Nick, I really appreciate our conversation.
Oh, thank you for the invite.
Really, thank you for taking the time to really talk about a topic that, from my perspective, is finally starting to get to the front burner instead of always being on the back burner. And it's encouraging to hear that in Colorado, we're actually putting money where our mouth is and really moving in the right direction. But I appreciate it's a calling foundation, the fact that we want to provide resources to anybody that needs it.
Right.
That money's not going to be an object, because that's so important, especially if you're going through or you're struggling with something. Chances are you might also be struggling financially or not know how it is that you're going to be able to cover the cost on things like that. So I thank you for your leadership in this area, and your leadership throughout the state of Colorado. Since I've had the opportunity to know you just in a lot of different areas, your example and your leadership of really looking at, again, our greatest asset, which is that employee, that first responder, and making sure that they're taken care of. It's
Absolutely.
It means a lot to those of us that have that same kind of passion, but just really don't know how to go about doing it. So thanks for being here.
Thank you.
That's all for this week's episode of the Elevate Your Call to Service podcast. Follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm grateful to Nick Metz for all he does for the first responder community. If you'd like to donate to It's a Calling, visit itsacalling.org. In the meantime, we invite you to visit our website at leleaders.com for our free guide, 10 questions to consider before putting in for your next promotion. Until next time, stay safe and remember, you have the power to make a difference. Thank you for your commitment to law enforcement. We're honored to be a part of your journey to success. Let's elevate our call to service together.